The international community has launched an urgent rescue mission to save Lebanon's military. The force is key to maintaining stability and security in the troubled nation, but it's now struggling to pay its own soldiers and can't even afford to put food on their tables. Melinda Nucifora has the latest developments in Lebanon's financial crisis.
Honour, sacrifice and loyalty. That's the motto of Lebanon's armed forces. It's viewed by some as a source of stability as the country descends further into economic chaos. But now it too is on the brink of collapse.
We're doing the impossible to reduce the suffering and the economic burdens on soldiers.
The head of the Lebanese military says there's no money left to fund the force. France has convened a virtual conference of 20 nations to raise tens of millions of dollars to prop it up. The military's wish list is painfully basic. It needs milk, flour and medicine to sustain its soldiers and fuel and spare parts to maintain its equipment.
We have to resort to asking friendly countries for aid, but I'll go to the end of the world to get aid so that the army stays on its feet.
The World Bank has declared Lebanon's financial crisis one of the worst the world has seen in 150 years. The Lebanese pound hit a new low against the US dollar this week. It's lost 90% of its value since 2019. Piles of money worth almost nothing. The decline has seen angry protesters return to the streets.
The Lebanese people are being humiliated when it comes to gasoline, medicine, flour, everything.
But on Thursday, they changed tact. A general strike was called, leaving Beirut's business district virtually empty.
The economic condition has hit rock bottom. The Lebanese pound has hit rock bottom. Everything's expensive. There's no medicine, no water, no electricity, nothing. How much more humiliation can we take?
With so much anger and so little hope, some fear the repercussions of a weakened army in a country already in crisis. Melinda Nucifora, TRT World.
Let's speak now to TRT World correspondent Imogen Kimber, who's been following the crisis in Beirut. Welcome to the show. Now, just how badly is the military impacted by this crisis, and why is that ringing alarm bells for the international community?
Well, as you heard from our report, the army is clearly in a very desperate situation. So for the army personnel, say a soldier, the value of their salary used to be around $700, $800 a month. That's now less than $100. On top of that, of course, the value of the budget, the whole army's budget, is worth so much dramatically less that they say it's difficult for them to carry out their regular operations. So, for example, just one thing they do is to work on thwarting the smuggling, which is a huge problem here, which is dangerous and difficult work. How can you do that with a reduced budget and with a reduced morale for the soldiers who, as I mentioned, are now getting less than $100 a month? So people are very afraid that having this force with a limited budget at a time when the country's in economic crisis, that it's becoming more and more chaotic, that creates a very dangerous situation for the country, just having a lack of security. And as you mentioned, the international community, it's a concern for them too, or more specifically, the army reached out to the US and France because from their perspective, if the army are weakened, the other major force in the country is Hezbollah, and the army being in a weaker position naturally puts Hezbollah in a stronger position, and that's something that the US and France don't want to see. And of course, overall, just as I mentioned, the country being in such a desperate economic crisis, there being an increase in chaos, and already in an unstable region, it just puts the country in a very vulnerable state to not have a stable security force.
Now, we just heard from the report that this is among the world's worst financial crises in more than a century. How did Lebanon end up here?
Right, well, we've been told, and the World Bank have said publicly, that Lebanon has been suffering for decades from mismanagement, from a lack of investment of public funds in the infrastructure, from rampant corruption, from a reliance on procuring dollars from outside, either through investment or through individual donors, and from a reliance on imports, a lack of production in the country, and a lack of exports. It's led to a banking crisis, and it's led to a financial crisis. There's an absolute shortage of dollars now, and the value of the Lebanese pound has hit rock bottom, as we mentioned in the report. It's now at 15,000 Lebanese pounds to the dollar, while the government still have the peg that they kept for years at 1,500 to the dollar. So that's really where the problem lies. And there hasn't been a government since the massive blast in August, which means there isn't a government to take control of the situation and to make reforms that the IMF have said are absolutely necessary for Lebanon to get out of this slump and move forward. So at the moment, the whole country is completely stuck. In fact, things are getting worse.
Now, you've been in Beirut for many weeks now, reporting from there, talking to the people, talking to businesses. How are ordinary citizens faring through this crisis?
Well, frankly, they're faring terribly. I mean, the problems that you heard about in the army, they're repeated in nearly every institution, they're repeated in nearly every company, and they're repeated for nearly every single individual. So the reduction in value of the salaries of those soldiers, you see that across the board for nearly every individual. The difficulty importing, which, as I mentioned, nearly every single thing here is imported, and even the things that are produced here still rely on imports to function. So that's affected the shortage of medicine in pharmacies, a shortage of medical goods in hospitals. The price hikes on food is over 400%, while the salaries have stayed the same, so it makes it almost unaffordable for people. There's problems with electricity, there's problems with the internet, problems with water. And as we've been reporting this week, one of the problems is importing fuel. So the Lebanese now, on top of all of these other issues, are forced to queue up for hours at petrol stations trying to get fuel for the day.
This queue for a petrol station is at least 45 cars deep, with many people having been here for well over an hour.
Every day I wake up at 6 a.m. and I wait for 3 hours at the gas station to fill my tank. It's a humiliation. Every day I waste 3/4 of my day when I'm not able to work.
For a taxi driver, every moment his car is stationary, he isn't earning money. But it's the same for others too. Some have taken time out of their workday to fill their tanks and are afraid they may lose pay.
I had an appointment at 11 actually, so that really affects not only my job, it affects our lives. Generally in Lebanon, I feel like we're in a prison, like we can't do anything.
Most stations are rationing fuel, so you can only get around 1/4 of a tank each time, which means queuing more often. And the knock-on effect of all of this is snarled traffic with tailbacks all over the city and beyond.
It's not just a case of joining a queue. Many stations like this one are closed as their pumps have run dry. That means motorists waste more precious time and fuel searching for somewhere that still has supplies. But how did it come to this?
Today what we have, it's a problem shortage of dollars that is causing all the problems in Lebanon in providing services. And one of these consequences is the companies, the cartel or the private companies that are not able to get money to buy the fuel and to import the fuel into the market.
The government subsidises fuel, so prices are kept low for the customer. But because of the devaluation of the Lebanese pound, this does not reflect the market cost.
The real value of the product did not change. What changed is the currency, the local currency in the market, devaluated. So the Lebanese citizens are paying 1/10 of the real price of the product, and the rest is being paid by the government.
Some say the subsidies should be lifted so that the cash-strapped government isn't paying for fuel for everyone, and instead it should just provide support to those who need it.